Now, Illinois Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi. He is a member of the House Intelligence and Oversight Committees and a good friend to us. Glad to have you back here. It is a really sensitive time. I'm curious, Congressman, what you make of this new assessment just released by the Pentagon about the success of Friday's retaliatory strikes.
Well, I think it was a firm response. I think that our hope is that the Houthis get the message and their Iranian backers get the message. All that being said, I am cognizant that the Biden administration probably would not have taken a even harder response for fear of widening the war in the region and for fear of potentially derailing the very delicate negotiations that are happening right now with regard to a truce in Gaza and the release of hostages. Further, I think that any offensive operations, quite frankly, would require Congress to authorize. And I think the Biden administration is, I think, negotiating all of these different parameters well at this point, but we're going to have to see how it plays out in the days to come.
I'm going to reiterate what Iran said, condemning the attacks, saying they contradict the U.S.'s declared intention of avoiding a wider Middle East conflict. So how concerned are you that these retaliatory strikes, not instigating strikes, retaliatory strikes, could lead to a direct conflict or war with Iran?
I think Iran knows that these were in response to its militias, causing the death of 3 U.S. service people. And as a consequence, I think they know that their pronouncements ring hollow. All that being said, I think that we obviously have to be very mindful that, further operations need to be delicately handled, and we can't have a widening conflict in the region.
Some of your Republican colleagues are saying that the Biden administration's military response was not strong enough. It waited too long to strike and gave, in fact, Iran time to prepare its defenses. Why do you think the administration telegraphed its intentions? I mean, how do you gauge this initial round of retaliatory strikes?
Oh, the Iranians knew that they were going to be attacked. At least their proxies knew that they were going to be attacked in response for the death of those 3 service people. I'm not concerned that somehow they didn't, that these actions were telegraphed. I think some of my Republican colleagues somehow want to go to war with Iran, and that's completely unacceptable. That's not going to be something American people want. And bombing Iran or attacking targets within Iran, which is what some of my colleagues want, is completely unacceptable as well.
How do you even respond to a colleague who says that? What do you say in the hallowed halls of Congress as you come across someone who's saying we really need to go and bomb Tehran?
I think that what I would say is listen to your constituents. They don't want another war in the Middle East. And so anybody who's calling for bombing Iran or going after targets within Iran is just inviting something that their constituents don't want.
How much do you think the escalating attacks on U.S. forces in the region would subside if some sort of a ceasefire agreement was reached between Israel and Hamas?
Oh, I think that it would subside. I think that at the heart of this is the conflict in Gaza. And so we have to make sure that we focus maximal attention on bringing about an end to hostilities, or at least a truce, so that hostages can be released. Of course, Hamas should be held accountable. There's no doubt about that. But we also have to flow massive amounts of aid into the Gaza Strip to help civilians. Finally, I would just say that one actor that I don't think we've talked about that is actually very important is the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. They have tremendous leverage with Iran, and in turn, those proxies that Iran controls. And if the CCP is going to be a responsible actor in the region, because after all, its own shipping is at risk in these very seas that the Houthis are attacking, I think that they should also use whatever leverage they can to reduce hostilities and the temperature in that area.
Should or will? What do you think from China?
Unfortunately, I don't know. I think that from my vantage point, obviously they should. The question is, Do they view this as something that is a give or conciliatory move for the United States, or is it something that is in their best interest? Obviously, we would argue that it's in their best interest. Any kind of wider conflict in that area would risk all the oil shipments that they desperately rely on. Most of their oil comes from the Middle East as well as Russia. And so my hope is that they would use whatever resources they have to reduce the conflict in the region.
Well, you make a good case. Illinois Congressman Rajna Krishnamoorthi, good to see you, my friend. Thank you so much.